Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everybody. Today we're going deep on something that is, I think, so fundamental to how we understand and share information. We experience this every day, right?
Yeah,
Like when we walk into our favorite store and everything's like perfectly organized.
absolutely.
Whether that's, IKEA,
IKEA, yeah.
Target, Best Buy,
Target, yeah.
the Container
A
Store.
container store, for sure.
You instantly know where everything is.
Yeah,
And then even, when someone explains something complex in a really simple way,
right.
and you're just like, wow, okay, I get it now.
It makes such a difference, right?
Yeah. So it's the core of organization.
It is.
But specifically, how it applies to making your communication, especially speeches, more effective.
Yes. And for you, the listener, you're here to gain knowledge.
Right.
You don't want to get lost in a sea of details.
Exactly.
But understanding the power of organization, this is a game changer. And it's not about tidiness. It's about creating mental pathways that allow information to flow clearly, leading to those aha moments, and preventing you feeling overwhelmed when you're learning something new.
Absolutely, yeah, like too much information all at once.
Exactly.
So the deep dive today has a really specific mission.
Okay.
We're going to extract the essential principles of how to organize the main body of a speech
Got it.
from, all the material we've gathered. So we're looking at academic insights and real-world examples.
Right.
So we can give you something practical,
Yes.
so you can use it
Love it.
right away
Yeah.
to really make your communication impactful.
And even though we're talking about speeches, remember that, the ability to organize your thoughts logically, that benefits almost every area of your life.
Oh, yeah.
Problem solving.
Right.
Convincing your friend to watch that movie you want to see.
Right.
It helps with everything.
Making a good argument.
Exactly.
Yeah, so let's get into, the nuts and bolts of this.
Oh.
Why is organization, such a make-or-break factor when we're trying to present an idea? Our sources really, really emphasize this.
Yeah.
There's this classic study
Okay.
where a college professor took a well-structured speech and just, totally scrambled it up.
Just jumbled it all up. And
Yeah.
it's fascinating.
Right.
The disorganized speech, it was harder to follow.
Well, yeah, I think we could have guessed that.
I mean, yeah.
You're right.
You would think so. But the magnitude of the difference in how much people understood, that was surprising.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it really shows how much our brains rely on order to understand things.
So, how much of a difference are we talking here?
It was significant, The study found a big drop in comprehension when people listened to that jumbled version
Wow.
compared to the original nice structured speech.
Okay.
Yeah, it makes you think.
So it really does matter.
It does.
It's not just a nice to have. It's
No. It's essential.
yeah. And it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Two other professors, they did a study to look beyond just comprehension. They wanted to know how organization impacts how the audience sees the speaker,
Oh, interesting.
their image.
Yeah.
And what they found was kind of amazing.
Okay.
People who gave organized speeches were consistently rated as more competent. But here's the thing. They were also seen as more trustworthy.
Wow.
Just because they structured their message well.
That's crazy.
It's our brains equate order with intelligence and reliability.
So just by being organized,
Yeah.
you're already winning points before you even start talking about the topic.
That
It's
is, yeah.
you've already got that credibility built in.
Yeah, it's like a head start.
Yeah, and it makes sense, right?
It does.
If you think about how we naturally process information, when you're listening to a speech, you can't just rewind
Right.
or go back a page if you get lost. Yeah, unlike when you're reading.
It's like following the plot of a movie.
Exactly.
If the story jumps around randomly, you're going to be so confused.
It'll lose track.
Yeah, and you'll probably just tune out.
Exactly.
And this need for coherence, that's not just about passively receiving information, right?
No, it's not.
Our material from Chapter 1 actually links being able to organize your thoughts for a speech with critical thinking.
Yeah.
So, the more organized you are, the better you are at critical thinking.
It strengthens your ability to analyze and synthesize information.
Wow.
Which helps you in all sorts of situations.
Okay, so not just about, the speech itself.
Yeah.
It's it helps you in life.
It's a life skill.
And also, if you're the speaker,
Right.
there's a huge benefit there as well.
Absolutely.
knowing that you have a well-organized presentation,
Yeah,
it's almost like having a mental anchor, right?
totally. It boosts your confidence.
Mm-hmm.
You're less likely to panic, and your delivery is just smoother.
It's like having a blueprint to guide you.
Exactly.
Right.
You don't waste energy trying to remember what comes next.
Yeah.
So you can just focus on your audience and your message.
It's like all that mental energy can go into connecting with the audience.
Exactly.
Rather than trying to remember, like, what's my next point?
Right. Now, our sources outline the 3 basic parts of any speech, right?
Mm-hmm.
Introduction, body, and conclusion.
Classic structure.
Yeah, and for this deep dive, we're just going to focus on the body.
Okay. The heart of the speech.
And there's a good reason for that, right?
There is.
I mean, the body is where most of your message lives.
It's the meat of the matter.
Yeah.
It's the longest part.
Mm-hmm.
And it has the most important ideas.
Yeah, and a lot of speakers, they develop the body first.
Makes sense.
Because once you have that, the introduction and conclusion are easier to figure out.
It's like building a house. You start with the foundation.
The body is the foundation of your speech.
Okay, so let's talk about the core components of the body.
All right.
The main points.
Yes, the main points.
Our sources describe these as like the central pillars of your speech.
They're the big takeaways you want your audience to remember.
And figuring out what those main points are.
Right.
It seems like that can be a bit of a process depending on your topic.
Definitely. Sometimes it's obvious.
Yeah.
Like with that hypnosis speech example.
Mm-hmm.
The goal was to inform about the main uses of hypnosis.
Yeah.
So the main points were just the different applications.
Okay.
Pain control, stopping smoking, and academic performance.
Right, those are like the 3 natural buckets.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in that case, it's pretty straightforward.
But sometimes your main points come from your specific purpose statement.
Okay.
Like with the quantum computers example.
Mm-hmm.
The speaker wanted to inform people about their history,
Yeah.
the technology, and their potential.
Right.
So those 3 things became the main points of the speech.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's a direct link.
But sometimes the main points, they kind of emerge as you learn more about the topic.
Yeah, that happens.
Like in the stained glass example.
Right.
The purpose was to tell people how stained glass windows are made.
Mm-hmm.
And so the steps, like designing,
Cutting.
painting,
Assembling.
those just naturally became the main points.
Yeah, because they're the logical steps in the process.
Right, so they flow from the topic itself.
Exactly.
But then in persuasive speeches, the main points sometimes come out of your research.
Mm-hmm. Like with the online voting example.
Okay.
The speaker was arguing against online voting.
Yeah.
And as they researched, they found the main concerns like voter fraud
Okay.
and people not having reliable internet access.
So those became the main points of the argument.
Exactly. The key points to persuade the audience.
So whether they're explicitly stated in your purpose or they emerge from your topic or research,
Mm-hmm.
the main points are like the backbone of your speech.
Absolutely. The building blocks.
But how many main points is too many?
Right. You don't want to overload people.
Yeah. Because then they won't remember anything.
Exactly.
So what's the magic number?
For classroom speeches, the advice is no more than 4 or 5.
Okay.
And often just 2 or 3 really well-developed points are more effective.
It's like too much information at once is hard to process.
Yeah, your brain just can't handle it.
So what if you end up with like way too many points?
Then you look for ways to group them under broader categories.
Go.
Like in that yoga example.
Mm-hmm.
They had all these points about breathing techniques
Yeah.
and different postures.
Right.
But they realized they could all fit under 2 main categories,
Mm.
breathing and postures.
So instead of like 8 separate points?
They had 2 main points with subpoints underneath.
Right.
It's about finding that framework.
Okay, so let's say you've got your main points figured out.
Mm-hmm.
How do you decide what order to put them in?
That's a strategic decision.
Yeah.
And it depends on your topic,
Yeah.
your purpose, and your audience.
Okay.
There's no one right way.
But there are some common patterns that speakers use, right?
There are 5 main ones, actually.
Okay, let's hear them. What's the first one?
Chronological order.
Okay, so basically going in order of time.
Exactly.
This is good for telling stories.
Yes, like narrating historical events.
Mm-hmm.
The esports example shows this well.
Okay, tell me about that.
It traces how esports started in the 1980s,
Mm-hmm.
then became a global thing in the 90s,
Okay.
then how major tournaments and viewers came in the 2000s,
Mm-hmm.
and what it's like today.
So it's just like following a timeline from beginning to end.
Exactly. And chronological order is also good for explaining processes,
Right.
like how to do something.
Okay, yeah.
Like that laser eye surgery example.
Okay, tell me about that.
It explains the steps in order.
Yep.
Slicing the cornea, reshaping it, and reaffixing it.
So it's all about the sequence of steps.
Exactly. And this pattern often fits well with informative speeches.
Okay. What's the next pattern?
Spatial order.
Spatial order. Okay.
This one is about how things are arranged in space,
Okay.
like physically.
Okay.
So you could go from top to bottom, inside to outside,
Okay.
or even from one place to another.
Like on a map.
Exactly, like describing the structure of a hurricane.
Okay.
You'd start with the eye in the center, then move out to the eye wall,
Okay.
and then the rain bands that spiral out from there.
Oh, I see. So it's like following a path through space.
Exactly, or you could describe the different regions of Italy.
Great.
Northern, central, southern.
Okay, so like moving geographically.
Yeah, and spatial order is also common in informative speeches.
Makes sense, especially when you're describing something physical.
Right, like a place or an object.
What's the third pattern?
Causal order.
Causal. Okay, so this must be about cause and effect, right?
You got it. It's about showing why things happen.
Okay.
It usually have two main points.
Okay.
The causes and the effects.
Right.
Like you could talk about the nursing shortage. You'd first explain what's causing it,
Okay.
and then talk about how it's affecting healthcare.
So first the why, then the what.
Exactly. Or you could discuss the collapse of the ancient Pueblo civilization.
Okay.
You could start with the effects, like them abandoning their settlements,
Yeah, okay.
and then talk about the possible causes.
So you can go effects first, then causes.
You can, and causal order can work for both persuasive and informative speeches.
It's a versatile one.
It is. It all depends on your goal.
Okay, what's next?
Problem-solution order.
Okay, that sounds pretty self-explanatory.
It is. You present a problem,
Mm-hmm.
and then you offer a solution.
Okay.
Like you could talk about puppy mills.
Oh.
You describe the terrible conditions. Yeah.
And then propose solutions like stricter laws and supporting ethical breeders.
So problem first, then solution.
Exactly. Or you could talk about the Electoral College.
Okay.
You'd explain why it's problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And then argue for a direct popular vote.
Okay, so you're persuading people that there's a problem that needs to be fixed.
And that your solution is the best way to fix it.
Right. This is definitely a persuasive approach.
It is. It's all about convincing your audience to take action.
Okay, and what's the final pattern?
Topical order.
Topical. Okay.
This one's the most common.
Okay.
And it's super flexible.
Okay, tell me more.
You divide your topic into subtopics.
Mm-hmm.
Each subtopic becomes a main point.
Okay.
Like, you could give a speech about Josephine Baker.
Okay.
You could talk about her as an entertainer,
Mm-hmm.
then as a spy,
Wow.
and then as a civil rights activist.
Okay, so it's like looking at different aspects of the same topic.
Exactly. And the key is to make sure those subtopics are logical and consistent. Right. So it still feels organized, even though it's not chronological.
Exactly. And our sources have a bad example, too, just to show how important that is.
Okay, what's the bad example?
It mixes up time periods and achievements randomly.
Okay, so it feels jumbled and confusing.
Exactly.
So even with topical order, you have to think about the flow.
Yes, you do. You could also use topical order to persuade.
Oh, okay, how would you do that?
Like with space exploration.
Mm-hmm.
You could argue that it's important because of the scientific knowledge we gain,
Okay,
the technology it creates, and the resources it might provide.
so those are your three main points, all supporting the same argument.
Exactly. And because topical order is based on dividing your topic logically, it can work for almost anything.
Wow, that's pretty powerful.
It is. It's a really useful tool.
So we've got our main points and we know how to order them.
Now it's time to polish them up.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Our sources give some great tips.
Okay, let's hear them. What's the first one?
Make sure your main points are distinct.
Okay, so they don't overlap or get muddled together.
Exactly. Like when you're outlining the steps to produce a Broadway play,
Okay,
you wouldn't lump rehearsals and performances together.
right, because those are two separate phases.
They are. Rehearsals come first, then performances.
So you'd make them two separate points.
Yes, to keep things clear for the audience.
It's like each main point needs its own space to breathe.
Exactly. They need to be distinct and separate.
Okay, what's the next tip?
Try to use parallel wording for your main points.
Okay, so that means phrasing them in a similar way.
Yes. Like when you're talking about the benefits of karate,
Okay.
you could say karate improves your mental discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Karate increases your physical strength.
Okay.
Karate teaches you self-defense.
I see. So it's all like subject, verb, object.
Exactly.
Very consistent.
That parallel structure makes them more memorable,
Right. It creates a pattern that's easy to follow.
and it emphasizes your key ideas.
So even though it's not always possible to do perfectly.
It's a good goal to aim for.
Makes sense. What's the last tip?
Balance the time you spend on each main point.
Okay, so you don't want one point to dominate the whole speech?
No, you want to give them all enough attention.
Right, because otherwise it's like some of your main points aren't really main points.
Exactly. They get overshadowed.
Okay, so how do you make sure it's balanced?
You don't have to be perfectly equal, but you want a rough balance.
Okay.
Like, if you spend 85% of your time on one point
Yeah.
and only 10% and 5% on the others, that's clearly not balanced.
Right, it's like the other points are just an afterthought.
Exactly.
So what would be a better balance?
Something like 30-40-30
Okay.
or 20-30-50.
Okay, so still not perfectly equal, but more even.
Right. And it depends on the complexity of each point.
Yeah, and how much supporting material you have.
Exactly. But overall, you want a sense of balance.
Right, so that everything feels important and well-developed.
Yes, that's the goal.
Now, our main points don't just exist on their own right.
No, they need support.
Yeah, that's where supporting materials come in.
Exactly.
Our sources point out that main points are essentially claims.
You're making an assertion.
Yeah, and to be convincing, you need to back them up.
With evidence.
Chapter 8 talks about all sorts of supporting materials, right?
It does.
Examples, statistics, testimonies, stories.
All sorts of things.
Yeah, and our material shows how these supporting points fit under the main points.
It's like building a case. You need evidence to support your claims.
And it can't just be any old evidence.
No, it has to be relevant.
Right, that's super important.
It has to relate directly to the point you're making.
Otherwise, it's just confusing.
Exactly, like using statistics about the number of immigrants to support a point about the reasons for immigration.
Okay, yeah, that doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. The numbers might be accurate, but they don't answer the question of why people immigrate.
So you'd have to move those statistics to a different point.
Yes, one about the demographics of immigration.
Okay, so it all has to fit together logically.
Exactly. The evidence has to support the claim.
Right, it's all about creating a coherent argument.
And guiding your audience through your thought process.
Speaking of guiding the audience, what about connectives?
Ah, yes, connectives, the glue that holds your speech together.
They're like the transitions and signposts that help people follow along.
Exactly. They show the relationship between your ideas.
And Sierra Winston's story really illustrates why they matter.
It does. She had great content, but she kept saying, all right.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really distracting.
It's like those little filler words can really undermine your message.
They can, even if you have great ideas.
And our sources make a great analogy. They compare connectives to ligaments and tendons.
They hold the body together.
Right. And without them, your speech can feel disjointed and weak.
It can fall apart.
So what are the different types of connectives?
There are four main ones: transitions, internal previews, internal summaries, and signposts.
Okay, let's break those down. What are transitions?
Transitions are words or phrases that tell your audience you're moving from one point to another.
Okay.
They often summarize what you just said and preview what's coming next.
So they're like bridges between your ideas.
Exactly, like saying, now that we've explored the causes, let's look at some solutions.
Okay, that makes sense. What about internal previews?
Internal previews are like mini introductions within your speech.
Okay.
They tell the audience what you're going to talk about next in more detail.
So it's like giving them a roadmap for a specific section.
Exactly, like saying, we'll first examine the historical roots of this problem, and then we'll discuss its impact today.
Okay. That helps people follow along. What about internal summaries?
Internal summaries are the opposite of internal previews.
Okay.
They remind the audience what you just talked about.
So they're like a quick recap.
Exactly, and they're especially helpful after complex information.
Right, because it helps solidify what you just said.
Like saying, so as we've seen, palm reading has a long and fascinating history, and it remains popular even today.
Okay, that ties it all together. And finally, what are signposts?
Signposts are short statements that indicate where you are in the speech.
Okay.
Or they highlight important ideas.
Like saying first, second, third.
Exactly. Or the most important thing to remember is...
Okay, so they're like little flags that say, pay attention.
Yes, they help the audience stay focused.
So whether you call them transitions, previews, summaries, or signposts, the key is to use them consciously.
Right. They're essential for making your speech clear and coherent.
And helping your audience understand your message.
Exactly.
So to wrap up this deep dive into organizing the body of a speech, what's the main takeaway for our listeners?
It's that organization is not just about structure. It's about clarity, credibility, and connection.
Right. It helps your audience understand you.
It makes you seem more competent and trustworthy.
Yeah.
And it helps you connect with your audience on a deeper level.
And for you, the listener, understanding these principles gives you a powerful tool. You can use this for formal presentations.
Yes.
Or even just for everyday communication.
Absolutely.
It helps you structure your thoughts.
Makes them more accessible.
Yeah.
And memorable.
And it prevents that feeling of being overwhelmed by information.
Exactly.
So here's a final thought for you to consider. Think about the last time you had to explain something complex. How could you have used these principles to make your communication better?
What kind of aha moments could you have created?
Some great questions to ponder.
And in future deep dives, we'll explore introductions and conclusions.
Building on what we've learned about the body today.
We'll complete the picture.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
It's been a pleasure.